to Game 2 of the World Chess Championship of 2021 between the boss, Magnus Carlsen, and the challenger, Ian Nepo. So, what do we have here today for you? I gotta say, personally, I was excited as Magnus tread into waters he typically doesn't go into in this game with one of my personal favorites, the Catalan. Different flavor, definitely, from his normal style. It can be a bit more dynamic. And let's go ahead and get to the meat. And here you've got a few different options. Okay, the closed Catalan is going to be with c6 and knight bd7 is typically going to run into each other. And then you have the open flavor of Catalan with d takes c4, which I recommended in my text, the aggressive Queen's Gambit declined. And now here, it's interesting because Magnus goes queen c2. And typically this means that he's prepared for, if a6, to play a4. Because normally, if you're going to play the queen takes c4 lines, it's more accurate to go queen a4 immediately. As a6, queen takes c4, we're transposing, and queen a4 versus queen c2 is avoiding this option after queen c2, b5. And it is a bit of a sideline. And I think it's a good choice because this is, again, not Magnus' typical position. So trying to surprise your opponent early, I feel, is an excellent idea here for the challenger. Again, Magnus is playing white. And I was asked, well, why did you choose Magnus' perspective in the last game? He's playing black. Because he's the world champ. So typically, I'm either going to take Magnus's perspective or the winner's perspective, if there is a winner in any of the games. Which, by the way, this fun fact hit me. You know, it's been 5 years since we've had a decisive game in a world championship. 5 years. We're really close today. But 5 years, come on. I know we definitely don't need to go back to the days of the first guy to win 6 gets it, because, you end up with like 130 draws or something. Ask the 2Ks about that. But, again, let's change the format. Do the tie breaks first. I'm telling you, make one of the, one of the guys are going to have to fight harder if they lose the tie breaks, if you do the tie breaks before the championship match. Okay, enough harping on that, sorry. So after b5, the main move is a4. Magnus in the game played knight e5, which Magnus is known for some sidelines, and maybe he had this prepared, but here's something from my notes. a4, where Black has little to no choice but to play b4 here. And natural development is typically something like knight bd2, but we have the extra option in knight f to d2 as it unleashes the eye of the bishop. So you're going to need to defend the rook. We get back our pawn. Say, okay, but you're losing the d pawn. And normally, after rook d1 and queen c5, bishop e3 is the main move. But when I did analysis on this, I'm not a big fan of bishop e3, as after queen h5, I feel like black has adequate play, and you're threatening things like knight g4 with pressure on the king side. So I was a big fan of, all right, let's just simply finish development. And the position's a bit awkward for black. I feel like white has more than enough compensation, and you can easily follow up. And we've got full harmony of the pieces. This is the type of position, Magnus loves harmony. You see it, you'll even see it in this game, as he's an exchange down for most of it, but he gets beautiful piece harmony. And That's where there's absolutely no issues. So, okay. After b5 in the main game, knight e5 was played, c6, and now the position is starting to be reminiscent of a Catalan gambit, which normally you get the Catalan gambit after d takes c4, knight c3, but you get these kind of c6 b5 or a6 b5 at some point lines to hold on to the gambit pawn, so to speak. So let's get back after knight e5, c6, a4 to chip away. Understandably, you want to shut the door on the strong bishop to make sure the rook is safe. And this is another critical moment. A takes b5 first. This 1 gets the rook eyeing some critical squares. It's always nice to develop the rook without having to do much. And 2, makes this bishop stronger because the pawn on c6 is no longer an obstruction. So now I want to play knight c3. And you get some very, very interesting lines here. It would be natural just to play knight f3, but we're in it to win it. Queen e4. Can't take the rook as the knight's defending. Knight g4. And it'll just go to show you how modern preparation is these days. Bishop g5, where we end up in this extremely volatile position. And it's hard to say if black's pieces can coordinate well here. I objectively do not know the evaluation, but white has better coordination, and that makes me lean towards the first player with their chances here. In the main game, not a takes b5, but knight c3 was played. f6. And you have no better but to play knight f3. And here's an interesting point. The most forcing move is b4, and it's been played in 2 previous games. Knight c5, and a pawn for the bishop pair, an awkward development. Pretty normal in these types of gambity Catalan lines. And you get this again, wicked and interesting imbalances to work with. And I feel like this is more to the style of the challenger than the world champion. But it's a good question. Well, why is Magnus playing outside of his style? Why is Magnus doing different things? Well, why did Fischer play the Alekhine, for instance, in the World Championship? Why did he play things that weren't typically in his repertoire? Makes you difficult to prepare for. It makes the seconds on the other team go crazy and makes you hard to beat. Surprise value. A lot can be said for it. Well, b4 wasn't played. A new move. And I think this is the first novel position we're reaching with queen d7. A solid enough move, just simply adding more protection to that b5 pawn. And in true gambit style, when you give up the center by playing d takes c4 early in the game, you give white the center and white's going to take it. Knight d3. Optically, a great square for the knight. And this is a good moment if you're a pause your video type of person to figure out what to do, because you really need to have a good feel to play this type of aggressive or gambity, we'll say, position. Is if you don't find the right move here, I feel like you're just a pawn down and you have no compensation for it. All right, so hopefully you took the time to try to figure it out. And you're already committed in the position, so we need to get more aggressive. If we can keep black bottled up, that'd be great. e5 is the move. Again, we're looking to unleash the eye of the strong bishop if possible. We'd love for our knight to get back to a critical square. Also opening up the e4 square potentially for the other knight. It's a flexible move, and as well, it prevents black from going e5 himself, which could be another avenue for the bishop once the queen moves later. So it does a lot of positive things. Bishop b7. takes, knight e4, knight a6, and it's still awkward for black to finish development here. Knight e5, and this was an inaccuracy. I feel like white would have been completely fine if we go ahead and capture here, as g takes f6 is arguably the best move to keep that f3 knight out of e5, and after bishop h6, this is stronger than the game continuation, and we're preserving the bishop pair, because at some point in time with the knight on d3, he could very well capture the bishop, and open positions, you definitely want to have the purr, so to speak. So after knight a6, knight e5, takes, knight a c5, and that knight has found a great home on d6, and the rest of the game is going to be really dictated by the strength of that d6 knight, as after knight b3, this is a critical moment, and I felt like the players had a decent amount of time, and I was watching this game live. Of course I was. And I looked at this position, and I didn't hesitate much that I'm like, okay, the rook on a1 is hit, the bishop on c1 is hit. We need to really deal with this. We're going to be losing an exchange no matter what. So do you want, if you're an exchange down, to keep more pieces and complications, or do you want to allow more trades? So I felt like this was one of the only moves that I can really put a serious hard question mark on from the world champion. And he played rook b1, which just simply allows takes, and you've gotten rid of a bishop, the two knights are gone, and this position is pretty rough for white. There's a lot of work to be done to try to hold this. What I felt was much more accurate here is bishop e3. If we're losing the exchange anyway, well, I want my bishop working, and this knight, which optically looks so good, may find itself with nothing to do in the near future. So after takes, and bishop e4, and there's dynamic compensation. This is a position that the engine goes, yeah, you got about equality here, as it's really hard to get this bishop working. Oh, sorry, of course I'm going to click off of a variation and completely lose my place and train of thought. Sorry about that. Okay, find it. So the bishop has, you can't really play c5, and in the event of something like knight takes e5, we could play knight takes b7 and follow up with queen h5, where we've got some serious threats. Sacrifices abound. The knight can come back to c4. You can see with this type of position resulting from bishop e3, we have a lot of dynamic compensation, and I actually prefer white if I had to choose. The exchange doesn't mean that much with all this harmony. So an uncharacteristic, I'd say, blunder from Magnus with rook b1, which allows this, but we're going to have a move coming up that I think that the challenger, it's going to haunt his dreams, especially if he loses this match. Rook d1, and there are a lot of lines with knight takes b5 here, and it's natural to go, all right, yeah, we got to get something back, knight takes b5. Well, black's just going to go queen b7, and the knight's going to need to move, and we can't allow trades. The only way you can stay in this type of game is to keep tension and complications, giving your opponent more opportunity to go wrong, which is kind of a funny thing to say when you're facing literally one of the best players in the world, but the rules apply no matter how strong the opponent is. If you're down material, keep tension and complications to try to outplay the opponent. Don't allow trades. If you have to trade, minimize it, and you normally are looking for pawn trades, not piece trades. Pieces keep complications. So bishop e4, and I like this move because we're eyeing the h7 square. There could be some potential for queen h5. And here is the move that when I saw it played, my first reaction was, this can't be right. This is probably like an error in the broadcast or something. And then when it was confirmed, my second thought was, I think Black got too excited about his position and really started overthinking things and got too creative. Because I can't really make a better reason why this next move would get played. c3 was played. And no matter how you shape this move, whatever idea is there, at the end of the day, it's just giving a pawn. Because we can simply go queen c2, and we're threatening both, and that's it. So the question is, what should have been played here? And this is a good pause your video moment, as I want to say both players were at move 24. They roughly had 20 minutes. And once you get to move 40, you're getting another hour, I believe. So they're trying to not make any massive changes in the position and just trying to make time control so they can mull it over. And I found it funny that as soon as move 40 hit, both players get up from the board and they're like off to their respective bathrooms. Because the tension, folks, you can cut it with a knife. And yeah, bathroom breaks are for world champs too. So coming from here, B takes A4. It's a pawn. Bishop takes. And there's some interesting lines here. Rook D4. In this position, again, wicked imbalances. But I've got a preference for Black here. The Black king is relatively safe. The light squares around the white king are suffocating, especially as soon as we go c5. This might be holdable for white objectively, but it's not fun. And I feel like this was the better way to go. I mean, he may have calculated this and been like, okay, I can't allow this variation because he understands chess better than I do. It happens, but I would be satisfied with maintaining an edge. c3 was played, and after queen c2, hitting both the pawns, g6, not allowing bishop h7, of course. So we just simply take the pawn. Queen takes was another option, but the engine liked queen takes more, but keeping the queen and bishop in the battery seems more logical. So I actually prefer Magnus's move there. And here, this is one of the last opportunities in the game for Black to really get back in it, because after the next move, Magnus has equality and then begins to press from the exchange down position. It just goes to show you, a knight that is cemented on the 6th rank. It's a bone in the throat. So queen g7 is what should have been played. And after something like f4 to defend the e-pawn, g5, and we get a dynamic and interesting position, and I'm inclined to favor Black. But after b takes e3, b takes a4 was played. In its own right, it does make sense, as it's opening up the b rook and it gives white something to worry about with the a-pawn. So we'll go ahead and grab the a-pawn. And we've got an equal position. And notice what I talked about earlier in the game. Magnus is a big fan of harmony of pieces. How much harmony do we have here? Every single one of the white pieces are well placed in doing something. You go, well, the rooks are on the open files. What about the bishop on a8? How bad is that piece? What is the queen on d7 doing other than being defensive? Not much. And when rook fd8 happens, that was a move that confused me as well, because Okay. You took your rook off the open file, so the position's a bit worse. Rook A1. One of the only things that could really hurt us in a lot of endgames is the outside passed A pawn. So keeping an eye on that guy seems wise. Okay, C5 makes sense. We want to activate the bad bishop. Not much that can be done about that. So Queen C4, simply going after this weakness on C5. So takes. And we put the queen on C4 to bother the C5 pawn, so let's keep with that. And also, you know, just subtle threats. What can you do? King H8. That's completely fine. No hurry. We don't want the queen to come down here and, you know, link up with the rook and start mating us or anything. Can't have that. And the position gets harder. And it was funny because I always, during these matches, I like to pop into the commentary to see, you know, the chess chatter. And you got people being like, man, this is a completely winning position for black. God, the rooks are so good here. Why doesn't he just, you know, mate white? Just put everything, you know, hit the F pawn a whole bunch and just win. It really isn't that simple. You can't coordinate the heavies here, and especially at move 31 with about 15 minutes to go, you don't want to slip here. And already, black should more than likely be looking at a way to bail out in the position. So I think he found the best continuation. You got to get some piece harmony going. Rook b6, giving up that pawn, and rook d to b8. So the big threat here is rook b1. And again, we are trying to avoid exchanges, keep complication. We're still in the hole when it comes to material. King g2. a6, a logical move. Just holding on to that outside pass pawn. And a6 is a move which says, okay, we are looking to continue pressing and playing this position. We're playing for the win. And Magnus, I loved it. He immediately, without missing a beat, plays king h3. And that says, yeah, I'm trying to win too. So this is actually still a game. Let's get it. Rook c6. And this is an important moment because where does the queen go? And these are the moves that the top guys make look really easy. Because to me, my first reaction was queen e3. And we have the potential to jockey, but with the queen on d7, we're not really getting much done. So it's much stronger to go queen d4. And the idea is that the queen is covering key squares, and there is no rook c8, as we can take, and our queen is defended. And even if the rooks coordinate, or there's more pressure put on the c-pawn, we can always push it, as it'll be anchored. King g8, understandable, getting off of knight f7 tactics, potentially. c4, pass pawns must be pushed. Some guy said that at one point. Queen c7. You're putting pressure there, so let's go queen g4, hit the e6 pawn. And it's interesting if you go back and look at the broadcast, as soon as this move was played, you could visibly see frustration in Magnus's body language because you know these players know exactly what's going on in the game, and Magnus knew that something went wrong for him. He was worse. He's finally starting to get something to work with in the position, and Nepo gives it right back. And more than likely, it's an effortless draw for players at their level, but he's got a little something, and being the player that he is, it's the Ulf Anderson rule. If you feel you cannot lose, you should play on. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, there are times I say that it's okay to draw. If you have king and pawn, your opponent has king, and they're showing that they know the technique exactly how to draw, it's okay to draw there. But this type of position, well worth playing out. c5. And after takes with check. And we've got a 3 versus 2, but with them all being kingside pawns with no real deficiencies, this is an objective draw, especially after rook f8, defend the pawn, queen f5, forces the trade of queens in the most optimal way. We didn't want to take with the pawn. Separating the pawns makes them weaker. So let's talk about this position and do some chunking, because oftentimes people go, well, why do I have to study basic endgames? Why should I study this type of position? And I did trainings with my students in the past using these types of positions where we would play training games with 5 minutes each, and we'd start from a position like this and say, try to hold with black. I mean, it's not really try to hold, it's always try to win, but you get the point. And what I want you to understand is, as we are trying to make progress here, inevitably pawns are going to be exchanged. So what gives us the best winning chances? And those who have studied the Lucena and Philidor positions will begin to understand. The easiest draw, let's assume that the G and F pawn got traded for the G and H pawn. A rook pawn is effortless to draw against. All you need to do is keep the king on the queening square, and you can even passively defend. Put the rook on the back rank and just go back and forth. Same principle applies for the knight pawn. Same defense. You've actually got to have a little bit of technique and understand the Philidor position if it's a bishop pawn. So if I'm going to trade pawns, the pawn that I want to have left when the dust settles is the F pawn. Of course, players at this level, and I would say anyone past, I think Silman in his complete in-game course from beginner to master gives it about 1600. That's essential knowledge for a 1600 USCF rated player, is the Philidor position. So anyone past that rating should know it, but I've had players a lot stronger than that mess it up in tournament play. Nerves and time trouble can do wonders for giving you winning chances. So now that I've given a little in-game spiel there, let's see how Magnus does it. King g4, rook b5, rook e7, just testing. Both players just testing, and you go, okay, would you like to trade? White's happy to trade here, as that would be a winning ending. Outside pass pawn. And that's a fox in the chicken coop type idea. While the king is going after this guy, we go after these. And with 2 connected pawns, even if it's a dream, we can't move with white, he comes all the way down here and grabs that pawn. The runner can't be stopped, as the king's always one move behind the pawn. So important to understand these types of themes in endgames. So, rook a7. Now, like I said, if we're going to trade, we want to trade under the best circumstances, h4. Trade the rook pawn. It's the least valuable of the pawns. h5. And king h4. And this is trying to muddy the waters. This is a draw. Black is showing the technique to draw. If the h-pawn captures back, and we're not making a lot of progress. Eventually, g-pawn pushes, f-pawn pushes, capture, capture. We get the most ideal version, but needless to say, Nepo knows how to draw this. Rook a1, g4. And an interesting decision here, getting this. And like I said, it muddies the waters a little bit, but the players pretty quickly go for a draw, which is accepted. But I wanted to hit on some of the subtleties because you don't exactly see it in the game, and wanted to give some in-game perspective just from, I don't know, my recent studies of basic in-games working with my students. So hopefully you enjoyed this analysis of Game 2 from the World Chess Championship, and join us for the rest of the games. Thanks.